YouTube. I'm Darren Ruggan, and thanks for checking out this video. In today's video, we're going to continue our public build, and in this episode, we're going to continue working on our reusable components. How do we pass in dynamic data structures so we can reuse the component in multiple locations but have different behaviors? If that interests you, then stick around. Thanks for sticking around. As a recap, the previous video we had a Navbar component, and I've moved that out into a shared module which is now imported in multiple locations. We have an input which is set in the controller, and we have a different title in that Navbar on multiple pages. In this video, we're going to continue that process, but having dynamic behavior with sort of action buttons that we would like to add to the top right hand corner of the Navbar, so that these buttons can be different on different pages, plus they will event out information that we can then have the context on the page to know what to do. For example, we'll do different behaviors on different pages. So we're about to jump into the code now, where we left off just finishing that Navbar with the text, and we're now going to jump into adding the action bars. Let's get into it.
Less code and less replacement of code. So now if I go back to the Pokemon, here's the list, and as you can see, this is actually returned even though it wasn't there before, mostly because it's in that shared component. Okay, so the Navbar is no longer copied from page to page. We now have our own app Navbar, which is using the toolbar from Angular, from Material UI in our Navbar component, Navbar HTML. So we have our spacer, which pushes it out, and then we have our button at the end. Now, I could potentially want multiple buttons. I could want a share and a favorite button, for example, a heart, or I could have another button here which triggers something else, be it a help functionality or a logout or whatever. But it will unlikely be a functional button like this component, as this particular component is using, if I show you again, is using the event service bus from the previous video. Now I'll put a link up here to the event service bus video if you haven't seen that one. But you can see this event service bus. So when that click is triggering that menu, so this hamburger menu as it's called, because it looks a little bit like a hamburger, that is now going to have consistent behavior and always trigger this when clicked. But we don't, and that's decoupled, so there's no dependency inside the pages, because the event service bus is plugged into all components and can be accessed. So we can have these decoupled events being passed through, especially for functionality like this, where it goes right up to the application. Now, that isn't the only use case for a Navbar. You generally also have not just this top level functionality, but you have a use case for the individual page. Okay, so this particular button here, for example, might be a different button somewhere else. So how will we do that? Well, we will create another input, and in that input I will input public, and I shall call it action action buttons. Okay, and I'll put it as an any. What I'm intending to do, and sometimes I do this if I'm working with other people, action buttons example equals. So what I'm thinking of doing, just so you know, is having an array of, so this shall be a action, which will be a string. So let's say it is fave or share. Let's say it's called share, and then I will have a material icon. So I'll call it a material icon. Let's call it matte icon so it's more clear. Material icon, and that might be I think sure is the right word. And then we will also have a label. Okay, a label. And that label is more for like a tooltip. So maybe I should call it tool label. And that one will just be share. And why is this beneficial to move this out like this? Well, it means that I can basically let's put a second instance in here, and I could have 2 buttons instead of 1 button. So let's just put that in. And this particular, I normally will leave that, I'll leave something like that in sometimes if I haven't created a type or anything yet. So if I'm working with someone else or I'm coming back to the code after a while, I have an example of the data structures which are not defined in a type, and I can't remember what they are. I can jump back in and say, oh yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like, and that's how it'll work. Alright, so if I look at the action buttons, so assuming that they look like this, let's go back to our component. Action button component. So here, this nav button, forget what it does just yet. Icon button, example button, there's the label as well. We shall do a ng4 let action button in 4 of action buttons. So that will now, if that's an array, it will now give us multiple ones. Okay, so for each one of these, it will give me a value. And in this, I will change this to be the action button dot mat icon. Okay, and I shall change this to be action event, and in here it shall be the action button. What did I call it again? I wrote it a moment ago. Action button title visible. Oh yeah, action. Okay, so what is the action? The event. Maybe event's a better word. What event shall be generated? Event. Okay, so tooltip label. Let's put the area label in because I do like to have my accessibility stuff in. So area label share button. So we should have 2 if I set this. Alright. So I might just take this into, let's just take this into the, which page shall we use? Book of page, first page I find. So after here, I will put this. And I will oh, it's an array. What am I doing? You fool. Did as it. It took me a sec to figure out why everything went red. So it's an array of dicks. So it was complaining because it wasn't valid JSON, which is completely valid, and this is complaining because I don't have a comma. So what I really should do is get it right before trying to comment stuff out. Rookie mistake. So in the action button example, let's just call this nav action buttons. So we'll just change that to nav action buttons. And I'll take that. I still like to have that. So I'm not searching for the use case, especially if you've got data structures which are not defined. Nav components. Let's just Alright, so action buttons. Let's go back to the poker page HTML and bind that in. So we now have the nav visible bar, we have the nav title, and now we will bind in the action buttons with the nav action buttons, what do we call it? So just check the Pokemon page. Action buttons, okay. Let's just save that again. To the nav action buttons. Alright, so what that's allowing me to do is change from the icon what should be displayed in this navbar. So this should hopefully show me 2 share buttons. Nice, nice, nice. Now here, I'm actually using, as we go, just go back to this in a sec, into HTML, components. So right here, I have the example icon. So this would, I'm going to change this to nav action icon, and this I'm also going to change to the action button dot area label, I think I called it label, and I also need to bind that. So rather than taking it as a string, it's going to now look for it as a variable, one-way binding, and that is out binding rather than in binding. Action event, action button dot action. So now the label should be the incoming label for each of these. I normally like to move this actually at the start of my line. There's a little bit of preference, but if you're reading it, see in this example, it's not as noticeable here. Well, it's not as noticeable normally because I can see the whole screen, but because it's zoomed in, I can't see it. It perfectly illustrates. If you put a for each at the end of the tag, the HTML tag, it's hard to see that. So if you're coming down through something, you're looking for like a repetitive task or a list of stuff, you can quite quickly miss it if you're quickly going through stuff. So I like to have it earlier in the tag so I can clearly see that this is a looping event before getting too far into it. Okay, so we're using this matte icon button, and we're actually using a text icon. So as you can see here, the material icons, you've seen probably me go to this page before. As you can see here's some icons, but there is a icon page. Where's the icon page? Here we go, the library. Right, so let's go to the library itself. Come on, loading. Alright, so here are all the icons that we can use for this pattern. Now we don't have to use only these icons, but if I'm using the material UI, it's nice that it comes with this stuff. And then in the future, if I want to do it a little bit differently, I could bring my own custom icons and do something slightly similar. But as you can see, here's a whole bunch of stuff. So let's just change this one to what's that? Swap calls. Sorry. So I'll look at swap calls. All right, let's go. Save. Oh no, I don't want to save this page. I want to save this page. Let's go back to the home page. and say, oh, not the home page, the poker page, and say that that one is a share and this one is a swap, and I will do this one as a swap calls, and the tooltip, which we don't actually have plugged in at this point, is swap calls, and we'll change this to swap calls. Alright, so this area label is sometimes used by readers. Poker count does not exist on page. What did I do? Did I delete it? Oops, looks like I just noticed this error down here, and it looks like I don't know how I did that, but come on, count. I'm not actually using it on the screen. I'm also, oh yeah, it looks like I've actually got rid of the Pokemon list as well. What did I do there? And this is why we check code in, so we can revert when we do silly mistakes and we're not sure. That's for another video. Is a innate array. So I haven't typed it yet. Okay. So now on this page we are going to have a title, we're going to have a navbar visible, and then we have nav action. Okay, so now if I go back to my Onic app, then I go from my home page to my Pokemon page, I have some errors. Property area label. Area label. I must have that slightly incorrect. Navbar component. Let action button. Okay, that's fine. There's action button. Action button. Area label. Should work a bit better. If we go to the Pokemon page, area label is not a bind component. Is it not? Did I not just have an area label? Am I losing my mind? I see the issue. So the issue is that the area label is actually not on the bindable components. So let's just, I was hoping to make it a little bit nicer there. I didn't realize that wasn't bindable. Yeah, you learn something new every day. So let's just change this to be a nav bar action button. So at least we still have something. Okay. Alright, so the next thing I would normally do is add a tooltip. So if you hover over it, especially if you're on a mobile, you might get some information. So let's go look at the tooltip. Tooltip. It's in a toolbar at the end of the day. So as you can see, tooltip, you roll over, info like this. You can do delays, you can do a whole bunch of stuff, elements. Okay. Alright. Accessibility. I might come back and do an accessibility pass. As you can see here, the tooltip can be bound in. Why isn't the label able to be bound in then? I can put the tooltip in. I'm not too sure about, because I would have thought if I would have been able to do both. So can I bind? I suspect I can bind this one. Excuse my belly if you can hear. Action button. Dot tooltip. Alright, let's see if that works. I'm hoping it will. There we go. Oh yeah, we got a responsive. Responsive action event is not a function. Action event. Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't actually done this function yet. So let's go to the Navbar component, and that will be the next one. And so action event, and it shall have an action. Okay. So what that can be used for is, let's just console.log the action. And at this point I'll say it's an any. Right. This is what is required, but technically we could pass additional information through here. Tooltip label is what I've called it. Okay. Save and then go back to use Navbar. So it's called Tooltip label. Is that working? Tooltip label. Do I have a tooltip? Undefined. Action button. Can you call that thing? Let action button of actions. Is that because I want it done here? I hope I don't need to wrap it to get the action button actions. Home page. Not home page, book page. Nav action buttons actions. Well, that's definitely binding because we see the two. Then I'm just going to grab one of these for a moment. Share is there. Let me just come back to the navbar. I'm going to temporarily just dump this here so I can make jumping backwards and forwards. So it's action button map icon, which is fine. Then I'm trying to do action button tooltip label and action button action. Oh well, I need to do double binding as well because I need to bind the two-way binding action event. Here's the action button dot event. Comment this as breaking the code. Of course, it's breaking the code. Unexpected item. I'm wrong here. Didn't need a double. Do I need a double? I'm not sure if I need to double bind this. Don't think I do need to double bind it just to get this data in correctly. Can't remember off the top of my head. Here we go. I click there, swap, and if I click here, sure. Very nice. Now my tool, I'm not sure my tooltip's working. Let's inspect the page. Inspect. And let's just change that back rather than binding and see if it just says that string. Inspect this, see the HTML is generated. Backward button, here's the button. Described by hole. Action tooltip. Alright. So let me just do that, go back, and let's see what's populated. It's because I'm pretending to be in a mobile, so there isn't really a tooltip opportunity here. But you can see here swap calls, reflect message. That's handy. So if I take it off mobile, now, why is my tooltip not working? Let's go back to tooltip. What have I done wrong? Action. Raise button, map tooltip. Sure. Oh, there, it's working fine. I think it was just my editor, the browser, had not kicked in properly. So that's working. Let's go back to the label. Why can't I find the label? Or is there a different name for the label? Tooltip area label. If I can find the label, maybe if I, normally what happens is it becomes something like this. So if I change this to action button dot area, it wasn't exactly it. What do we call it? It's here. Area label. Oh, we did. Area label. Okay, let's see what happens there. Go to the Pokemon. So swap call, let's see. The area label will be there more for readers. Area label, swap call. Now that's nice. I like to add these in case someone is has a screen reader, for example, or they're a bit of difficulty with sight. It means they're not excluded from using our application because we're using the right types of components, being a button, which means that it can be triggered from like a screen reader because it is a button, rather than just a random thing with a click event on it. And then these area labels, although never visible, are very beneficial, I think, in demonstrating what needs to be done. So in this example, I think we'll just leave that in, which gives us an example of what should be there. But what I might do is just add this on another line here, just so it's clearer what people would see. Okay, and just to recap the data structure. The data structure is that this event is what I want it to be called. So this is what's going to come out. So I can process that event. All right, event. Actually, let's just send the whole action button through. I think sending the action button through is better because I might want additional data. So instead of, action event. So this event name isn't exactly needed, but it is beneficial if you're having logic, because if you've got an array, this would be sort of my key, which I'm then making the determination of what to do in the higher level function. So in this Pokemon page, for example, I would then make a determination what to do on a search. So I'll look inside the event parameter. Sorry, the event inside the this action button will be passed through, and inside it, I will inspect the value of this column, this data event, and if it is sure, then I will do the behavior that I want to do for sure. So that keeps it decoupled from the rendering of this button. Okay, so this is clicking, and that is doing an event. Okay, so the navbar component. Now, this navbar component is eventing here, but it's still not going anywhere. Like, it's still sitting inside this module. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add an output. So to add an output, we need to add an output. 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 And with that, I would output, and I would call this an action. Oops, caps locks. An action event, which is a, what did that show me? An action. Did that auto? I thought I saw it autocomplete there for a second. Action, yeah, actions event emitter. There we go. Event emitter. So let's quick inspect. So now, as you can see, we have, I like to move that over here. Oh no, it's just going to move back in alphabetical order. Yeah, what I said. So components, event emitter, and output. So this output lets me bind into this event emitter, but what I would do is I would call this an action event. And I would then just say it is a new event emitter. Equals a new event emitter, and I would then say it is an any event because I haven't typed it, and then do that. So here, have I got 2 action events? Yeah, okay. Let's change this to event action. Do I want to do that? No. Let's just call it to action event. Okay. Naming, people get very upset about it, but at the end of it, if it's your code for you, then make it something that you want it to be. There are consistency patterns, etc., but it doesn't really matter. Well, it's not exactly true. It does matter. Having consistent naming patterns helps you work in a team, but if you're solo, then it's not as big a deal. Alright, so now the navbar is now got a event service bus connection, so it's using a decoupled mechanism to talk to the service bus, this event service bus, and that event service bus is also being subscribed to here, so it's listening to that event. There's no direct communication between those. And then when we go to the Pokemon list, this is slightly different, where we're passing this down. That event is being sent now to the action event. So then I will do this dot action event dot emit action. So I have commented here and now on the output, so this is the internal logic, so the internal logic of the button. So when I click the button, I want to call this function with the data, which may be one of these, passed in. It will then take that data, log it out for us because we're testing, and we would remove this, and then it then does the action event emit. So what it does is, because this is a reusable component, it's not doing any of the logic to do these buttons, to do a share or a swap or any of that. It's able to be consumed or composed together to give us different behavior but have a consistent look and feel, which I think is the best. It's the best. So now what we need to do is we need to add a function to handle the action. So let's say process nav action, okay, and we shall shall take an action coming in, which we'll just say is any for now, and I shall process bug. I should just dump it out because it doesn't really matter what we're doing right now, and I'll throw a little alert just to do something different. Okay, alert action. Okay, now this process nav action, what that means is when we come back to the HTML, so now we've got the function that we want to process it, we need to go to how it's used. So it's used when we define it in the view here. So what we've done here, let's might just put these on some new lines so it's easier to read. So I have, oops, undo. So okay, so what we have done to date is we have bound these into the navbar, and I'll add another one, and I think I've called it action event. Okay, so that will be a method. It should take the event. Okay, now let's see how that goes. Undefined. Okay, undefined. Oh, it hasn't loaded yet. Oh, that's interesting. Undefined a lot. Okay, so that to me is a bit of a bug. Dollar event. Dollar event is what we want. Undefined. It's gone every single time. I think I made a mistake somewhere. Okay, so this action event. Hold an event. Action event. Why is that action event triggering every time? I do not know. Okay. Oh, I see the problem. I bind it the wrong direction. This is for incoming bindings, and I'm actually trying to listen to the output. So it's complaining if I actually read this, because $event isn't populated. And the reason $event is not populated is because that is the event from the event emitter that's coming out. Subscription to the event emitter to the action event. So now, if I go. And it was running, and the reason it was happening time after time is that was the render loop that's constantly running. So every time it was trying to render, it was failing. So now I'm expecting this to work. Okay, so now if I click this, and boom, is passed through. Can't really read that. Let's change that just to finish this up in a little bit nicer. Pokemon page. And let's do action dot event. Excuse me. So now we have a share and we have a swap. And if we go back to the home page, you'll see that we don't have any secondary actions because they're not passed in. So that is the scope of today's video. I hope that you find this beneficial. Let's just do a very quick recap. I have created, let's just close the open editor. We have created previously we had some pages. We have a home page, we have a Pokemon page that are then rendered inside our application, which has got the side navs. We've now moved the nav bar from being defined inside each page into a single component, which has got a title, it has a hamburger menu, and then it has this optional, it has a spacer, which we're using flex to just move it out, as far as it needs to do. So those will always be on the right hand side of the page, irrespective of how big it is. And then from that, we're taking this incoming action buttons. So if they're passed in, we'll have some action buttons. If it's null, then there'll be no action buttons. So for each one of those action buttons, I'm expecting them to come in that format here, which is an example here. So I'm expecting them here. We're going to use the material icon, which will be visible. And you can pick from a heap of icons here, as you can see in the material design icons. So whichever icons you would prefer for this particular pattern. And then with that, we also have the mechanism to do the action. So what is the action event? So we're going to pass this button. So we're going to create an event because we use an event emitter. Then we have a class for the actual nav icon button in case we want to do something else with it. Then we've added an area label and we bind that in, and I've correctly camel cased that, as you'll find that most of those will end up being camel cased when they go to the binding in Angular. So that's one-way binding from the data. And then we also have the tooltip. So when we're on the desktop, for example, we can roll over and we will get some data, but obviously it doesn't work in the iPhone because there isn't a hover event in order to trigger a tooltip. So if you're not going to deploy a web version, then you could probably skip the tooltip entirely. Although if you're doing an Angular application, I don't really understand why you wouldn't deploy a web application if it isn't too much additional effort, okay? Because then you have a web application and you have a mobile app. So you can also determine if it is on the web, then you can try to like, here, use the app web. By the way, we have an app. Why don't you install the app? Because discovery in the App Store is difficult as well. So just worth thinking about. So the nav component. So the next bit that I would do in my shared components, and I won't do that today, but I might do it in the next video, is we've spoken a couple times about a detailed component for the Pokemon. So maybe like a Pokemon card. If you think about like a Pokemon card that used to be as a trading game, a Pokemon card could easily be shown here in the preview view. So this could just be a Pokemon card, for example. And then if I go to the details page, which we might show more because there's a lot of information here, then at that point I still want to see that Pokemon card, but then I'll see some additional information. Okay, well that's a normal use case being like a navbar, but if you look at a design pattern, I like to look at pages and then widgets within the page. So the page is normally responsible for loading data and doing whatever needs to be done. As you can see, I say loading data. It's responsible for connecting in the services. My shared components, I only really use an event service bus to trigger in for them to be able to trigger out. But I would much prefer my components to be relatively dumb, as in they take no internal actions. So they normally would have inputs and outputs. And then every so often I might have one with an event bus. So the nav is probably the main one where I'm trying to trigger that nav mechanism, and I don't want to bind all of the components. But everything else will probably just be inputs and outputs. Okay, well I hope that this is continuing to be beneficial. But as you can see, we now have a component which is fully reusable, as in the state is passed in and events have come out. So it can then be used more and more in a lot of different locations, because the actual function that you want to do on those buttons, that will be in the context of the underlying page and not inside the navbar, because we want these behaviors to be different each time. So for example, that share button might be different on each page because it's different URL, different stuff you want to share, etc. Or it could be this swap call. I don't even know what I would do with swap call, but at the same time we can do a heap of different stuff. I could be doing like bookmarking is a useful one. We do that regularly. Well, we use both of these. And if it's bookmarked, so I mark the bookmark, I might then change the input. So then the input color changes from here to here. And then that will trigger through. There's a change detector in these components, but we'll leave that for another day. So I hope you find these videos beneficial as I sort of build a Ionic web application that can go on the web, Android and iOS. I think we might get to some of those soon. But join me in the next video where we'll do that Pokemon card, which I'd like to do just to finish off the app a little bit, and we might put something in the home page. And then we can get to some of the more advanced stuff on top of this application. I hope you enjoyed the videos. I'm Darren Ruggin. Ciao.
Can I launch products on the internet that make money? You'll have to follow me to find out. Then hit the subscribe button and join me on my journey.